What is the general population going to do with their time once everything's automated and like they can't?
They're going to put on the
who will
VR.
employ them?
They're going to put on the VR goggles and they're going to go into their private harem, and they're just going to coom all day. That's what's going to happen.
Now we've shifted sort of to talking about the nature of work. And I've actually been reading quite a few books about this, particularly books talking about hunter-gatherer people. Like there are many hunter-gatherer tribes that still exist in nature and are studied to get a better insight of how sort of we are supposed to be acting in a natural state. Like these people, they are basically the blueprint for human behavior. This is what, like 1,000 generations, 100,000 years of human evolution has placed us in a natural state. And out of most of the hunter-gatherer foraging tribes that have been observed, people realistically only work like 3 to 4 hours a day. And the nature of the work is not boring. It's fun. It's a social activity. It's basically just either men going out to hunt and using just active strategy and tactics to hunt down prey, or like men and women going to pick berries and try to just like a scavenger hunt for food. Like that is the nature of work for hunter-gatherers, and that is what we have basically, like our brain and our brain chemistry has been evolved to do. But 10,000 years ago, sort of the rise of agriculture completely changed the nature of work on a human scale. The whole MO shifted to just like grinding out as many hours as you can to build wealth. And wealth is used as a utility to not have to do more work. And it has persisted like this in, I guess, capitalistic society, where it is a work-dependent society. I believe people in the 1920s looked at the current date now, 2020s, and thought like, wow, in the future we're going to have all these great machines and robots and inventions and doodads to stop people from having to work so much. And there were concerns back then over people having too much leisure, I guess, which is what Tom was talking about. But the opposite is true.
I don't know that I'm talking about too much leisure. I guess my question is just like, what will people do with their time in the absence of work?
That's
like,
right.
And also, what kind of leisure?
You're gonna have all this free time, and that really hasn't materialized with the way the economy is working right now. And you hear it all the time in American society, where if you simply work hard and pick yourself up by the bootstraps, then you too can have the big house with 2 SUVs and a golden retriever. And that's just, the wage stagnation has made it so that's simply not the case. There's like not enough hours to work at what a lot of current wages are at low skill jobs to where that's a feasible reality. And it's going to come to a front where we have to rethink the nature of work. I know that guy, like the dog walker transgender went on.
They rock.
They went on Fox News and representing anti-work, and they got a clown for that. But the logic behind an anti-work movement is not faulty. There are legitimate reasons relating specifically to how we kind of evolved to be, why working as much as people do in civilized society is just not healthy. And you see people with all these health problems, record obesity, record depression. It's because we are being forced, not literally, but out of sort of financial necessity. So many people are just being forced to dedicate so much of their waking hours to working a repetitive, boring job where they just have to sit around and deal with customers in a completely
that's true. But to throw in a boomer statement here to counteract what you're saying, who's gonna pay for them if they're not gonna work?
Well, that's what we're gonna have to figure out economically.
We're gonna
all
have
right.
to
Well, here's the problem.
Yeah.
It almost seems like, I'm not saying you're proposing this, but it almost seems like one inevitability of a lot of people who are going to be talking more about this anti-work and we need to be provided for, is going to be some kind of a communist dictatorship, which, I mean, your ancestors experienced in Maoist China, mine have experienced in the USSR. I don't want that to be the route that people go on again, because it almost seems like we're these goldfish where we just forget about whatever happened the previous generations and keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. So I understand what you're saying, but is there some way that we can avoid taking it that particular direction?
I think it more so, not necessarily like sort of violent uprisings to just like manually redistribute wealth, which is what I believe many of these communist regimes were about. There has to be a philosophical change over the nature of like what it means to work. Because all these questions started coming up as soon as basically the average college degree stopped being worth the money. Every year since the 1970s, no matter if we're in a recession or inflation, no matter the economic conditions, the cost of tuition on average has risen by 5 or 6, 7, 8% every single year. For the cost of the average bachelor degree today, you could get 5 bachelor's degrees in the 70s. So back then, it was actually like legitimately feasible to like work a job at like Publix or whatever your local grocery store chain is. You could legitimately work at a grocery store, pay your way through college, and then like buy a house at age 25 and then start earning equity. Not on the table anymore. Not at all feasible. I don't know what specific point it happened, but the cost of college has kept going up and the wages have remained relatively flat. And at some point, the cost of a degree made it so that on average, it's not in your favor to go to college, load up on 6 figures of student loan debt just to enter the workforce and basically just be an indentured servant out of financial necessity, where it's like, oh man, I've got 6 figures of debt. I've got a Porsche worth of debt in the back, and now I have to work, and I have to go to work every day, and if I get laid off for like 1 month, I'm in just complete financial ruin. So I better go to work, not ask for anything, not push the envelope, and just keep my head down and keep working. And it's unfortunate. It's I basically did everything people told me not to do by investing a lot of my time in YouTube. And it was not the money that made me do it. It was the agency of being able, just simply being able to say like, I don't feel like working today, so I'm not going to. And this is why something like a YouTuber and Twitch streamer is so appealing. It's not the money. People may say it's the money. The news always reports on big dollar amounts, whatever these top 10 Twitch streamers are making. That sells headlines. But the true sauce of what draws people into this profession is the ability to set your own schedule and not have to worry about taking your foot off the gas for 1 second and then suddenly not being able to make your house payment for that month.
That's fair enough. Like we said before, I don't think most people are going to be able to do that. The closest I would say is having jobs where it would be less the Japanese model, where, for example, workers, as far as I heard, have to pretend to be asleep in the office just to show the boss how hard it is they work. The model would rather be, this is what needs to be done, and you can do that at your own time, at your own pace, however you want to. Because it seems like there's so much waste that goes on in the workplace. Like, I don't know, like, how much do people actually work as opposed to just watching cat videos all day? Or, you know, like, it's kind of like that thing from Office Space where the guy says that he only works as much, like, the bare minimum that he has to, which is like if he could say like 15 hours per week, and that's it. Otherwise, he's just pretending to be busy. Right. Like, I think is a big factor here.
It's soul sucking. Like, and this is, unfortunately, a lot of people have never been taught any different, because basically before the internet, this was your only option. You'd either like work at McDonald's or you work at like a mechanics and do like hands-on stuff and have a bit more flexibility. Or if you wanted to be a high earner, you had to get one of these cookie cutter white collar jobs where at one point upward mobility was possible and loyalty was rewarded, but that doesn't last. That didn't last long. And I think as early as the 70s or the 80s, you had a lot more of these companies focusing resources into human resources and middle management, where you, the worker, you no longer have autonomy over anything. You're just a peg. You're just a cog in the system. It doesn't matter if you work at company A or company B. You are no closer to actually having the reins over your own earning potential. You start as a salary, and for most people, they probably retire after 40 years making 20% more. It's just like barely even enough to match inflation. And you give all your loyalty to the company, and they tell you, "Oh, we're a family. Oh, you put in the dues, then you'll be rewarded." And economically, it's not in their favor to reward you for doing that. So overwhelmingly, that's not going to be the case for you. You're just going to sit at a company, or maybe you'll go to 2 or 3 companies in the line of work, and your earning potential is never really going to be that much. And that's fine in times of like economic boom, where you can at least rely on equities prices to go up. But I have a feeling we've reached a point where like equities prices and real estate might be toast. So you're basically just capped. That's another appealing thing about independent contractor online work. Not even online, but just like starting your own business. Once you're on the other side of that, then your income becomes uncapped. I have been reading this book. A lot of books I've been reading that are kind of like very black pilling, but in the same way, refreshing in terms of kind of getting answers for kind of why so many parts of modern life just don't feel right. The book I'm referring to is called Civilized to Death by Christopher Ryan. And he has a passage in it where he sort of talks about the advent of certain religions as it came to the advent of agriculture. Because agriculture, as it first came up in certain fertile parts of Eurasia, it basically created wealth in terms of like the first time that human beings had like stuff worth guarding, in which case it would be excess grain or excess crops from the harvest. And with wealth became an end to egalitarianism, because hunter-gatherer tribes, they've been observed and anthropologically they're thought to have been prevailingly egalitarian cultures where no one is supposed to have more than anything else or more than anyone else. But with agriculture, there was a new norm where basically 95% of people would just be poor and they would work for the one guy who controlled all the stuff. And gradually over 10,000 years, it kind of developed into what our society is today. But in the book, Christopher Ryan basically said, or he was referencing other literature, anthropological studies, suggesting that a lot of religions and or religion sort of shifted. Our relationship with nature shifted to being more antagonistic, where natural resources, instead of being considered like thankful bounties, they were now just stuff for the taking, stuff to be exploited. And as our relationship with nature changed, the author argues that so did our relationship with the idea of God, where instead of basically a lot of these pre-agrarian civilizations, they would worship a series of gods related
animism,
to the forces of nature, like Mother Earth.
Yeah. And
they'd be like thankful for the berries or whatever they could find in nature. But once agriculture started, a lot of the Abrahamic religions shifted sort of like a singular, vengeful, all-knowing, all-powerful God, and sort of a list of rules codifying the nature of property. And I think this was also a time where sort of the nature of women in egalitarian tribes was quite fair and quite equitable. And then once agriculture started, women basically became a means of producing more human capital. And I think even in the Bible, there's one of the commandments that's like, do not covet someone's wife or any other property, where I guess kind of the nature of how we viewed nature itself and each other changed with agriculture and through the end of egalitarianism, to where I think a lot of religion created during that time was a bit more hostile towards sort of the rights of the individual man.
But here's the funny thing about everything you're saying right now. The contradiction, where you would have somebody like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was saying word for word everything you're talking about right now, as far as this nobility of the people who lived in this kind of hunter-gatherer lifestyle before the advent of agriculture. You know, I believe it's called like the noble savage. You had, inspired by a lot of his writings as well as the writings of others, you had these intellectuals, and this was not a movement that was led by the masses. This was a movement that was originally frothed up by the intellectual elite of the time in France. You had the French Revolution, and you had some of the bloodiest conflict since quite a while going on back then. And then obviously you had the Communist Revolution afterwards in Russia and in China. You know, all the starvations and things of that nature ended up happening. So it is very interesting, though, how you have very noble goals. I'm not saying you in particular, I'm just saying in general, people who think about this stuff, they have very noble goals in mind, and they see the problems which are very self-evident that we're currently in. But every time a solution is attempted, it ends up being like 100 times worse than whatever it is that was attempted to be prevented. So I'm curious, what do you think about that contradiction?
It's sort of like a Pandora's box situation where through all these communist revolutions where they have attempted to instill states which enforce these values, we're sort of just in a Pandora's box situation where once the box was open, we can't really go back, I don't think. We have to, in terms of any actual tangible change to going back how, I guess, human beings were meant to live, it's going to come out of just small steps on a very individual scale, because there's now like nuclear weapons in play. You try to take over a country, well, now everyone's just going to get knocked into the Stone Age. And maybe one day that's what's going to end up happening. A lot of, I think, post-apocalyptic literature has foreseen something like this, where eventually all the world governments and institutions and power, it gets too big, and it ends up imploding and collapsing on itself, and people just get put back into a state where kind of we're back at square one. But it's not
Planet of the Apes, you could say. You bad. Idiots, you blew it up.
Yeah. All sorts of literature and authors envisioned a scenario like this. There's a big question I'm asking myself recently, and this is like part of the thesis of Civilized to Death, where like, has the advent of civilization been a net gain for the overall well-being of humanity? And we've of course been told our entire lives that, like, yes, civilization is good, progress is good, we have all these medical advances. And basically the thesis of the book that I've been reading is that yes, we have all these solutions to problems now, but a lot of these problems are simply only there because of the advent of civilization, like plagues, most recently with COVID, but it's a long history of humanity, and plagues really only came out of, they really only came to exist because human beings were living in such close quarters with animals in extremely squalid and unequal cities in Europe and Asia. And you can look at a bunch of problems today and see that it's not nature that caused the problem. It's the progress of civilization itself, which is creating all these huge complications for people that are unprecedented, and we don't really have the evolutionary physiological tools to deal with. So yes, progress has brought us a lot of incredible innovation, but are we any happier for just living in a lot of cities and situations that we do? Are we any happier for having a car when the whole purpose of that car is to commute you 30 minutes into work each day, burning gas, polluting the air, and making you waste a bunch of money, especially now that gas prices have gone completely berserk, where, as in pre-agrarian times, you would simply leave your tent or bunker or whatever and go out and forage for food, and all this complexity and strife of modern times, it wouldn't even be a problem. I mean, a lot of hunter-gatherers have been observed of being just incredibly happy and incredibly high spirits, and that's certainly not something you could say about a lot of people today. I'm not going to completely toss the boat over or whatever and say that, like, yeah, I'm like the Unabomber now, and we should
going full on
level society and return everyone to pre-agrarian standards, because that's just simply not realistic. But there should be questions, big questions that we have to ask ourselves, where is all this stuff in the modern world actually contributing to making our lives better?